Welcome to the Visibly You podcast, where we explore the intersection of body image, nutrition, and mental health. In today's episode, we are joined by Olivia Lynch, an experienced dietitian who has helped countless individuals develop healthy and sustainable relationships with food. I'm your host, Oluwaseun Obaro, a licensed clinical professional counselor who specializes in helping individuals overcome the harmful effects of weight stigma and unhealthy relationships with food. Together, we will dive deep into the impact of weight stigma on body image and nutrition and explore practical strategies for cultivating a healthy and positive relationship with our bodies and food. Whether you're someone who has struggled with body image issues or you're simply curious about how to develop a healthy relationship with food, this episode is for you. So grab your favorite snack and get ready to join us on this journey to become our best, most confident, and visibly you selves. Today, I will be talking about weight stigma and its impact on body image and nutrition, and how health at every size can be used as a health approach to reduce weight stigma and improve health. And I would like to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Olivia Lynch. She's a registered dietitian, and I've been working with her for some years now. She's an expert in the field of eating disorders. So, Olivia, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Olu. I'm glad to be here.
Yes.
And I'm so excited to be on Visibly You for your first episode.
Thank you so much.
And I'm really excited to talk more about health at every size and, give your listeners a better understanding of, what is health at every size?
Yes.
What is weight stigma? How does it play a role in diet, or how does diet culture play a role in enforcing weight stigma too?
I want to give our listeners a better understanding of weight stigma. What is your understanding?
Well, weight stigma is basically weight-based discrimination or size-based discrimination.
Can you give us an example of weight-based and size-based discrimination?
I think one of the best examples I could give is in a healthcare setting. We might see someone, if we give two different examples, someone in a smaller size body goes to the doctors for knee pain. They might receive different treatment than someone in a larger body who goes to the doctor for knee pain. Someone who goes to the doctor in a larger body more often would be prescribed a weight loss diet and be told that they need to lose weight to help their knee pain, versus someone in a smaller body would be prescribed the proper treatment of physical therapy, or, if they need knee surgery, doing that as, one of the last measures. But for someone who is in a larger body who's told you need to lose weight, your weight is causing your knee pain, is a good example of weight-based discrimination.
Going back to your example of weight-based discrimination, I thought a lot about idea that thinness equates with health, right? And that being in the larger body equates with, not being healthy, right? And it creates a dynamic for people where they feel because I'm in, a larger body, that means that I'm not healthy, right? And, that ties into the weight-based discrimination and the weight stigma, right? I think that those who are in larger bodies, a lot of the times experience a lot of shame around their size and their weight due to that idea that being in the larger body is unhealthy. And then also with that experience of shame, there can be that feeling of guilt. So I think weight-based discrimination, weight stigma, can definitely present itself in different settings, in the healthcare setting, in other settings as well.
And some other settings, it could also present itself as in our environment. We might see it at an airport where someone is charged double maybe for 2 seats because of their body size. It also might be in different treatment centers, if they don't have blood pressure cuffs that fit people of all body sizes to give, good access to treatment.
And, when we talk about weight stigma, as you mentioned, what's your understanding of its impact on body image and nutrition?
Diet culture really reinforces weight stigma. But one form of that would be like someone in a larger body might be told by society, you need to diet. And dieting, we know, is a form of restricting food groups, restricting calories. There's, tons of different diets out there.
Yes.
And let me tell you, none of them effectively work, right?
Yes.
So we do know that like 95 to 98% of the population long term does not keep off weight loss that occurs during the period of a diet. Weight loss is usually rapid for people. A lot of times it's also usually water weight. And something important to note is like diets aren't being prescribed by friends, by healthcare providers. And there's not enough scientific evidence to support these diets being prescribed for our health. We know it can cause inflammation, it can cause more stress, more cortisol levels increase. And something else like with weight stigma to consider is that we also have weight cycling on diets, and there's yo-yo diets, right? So like hopping on a diet, hopping off of it, hopping back on a diet. And with that, we see weight cycling occurs for people. So I think something else important to mention with that is that we shouldn't be using diet. And also it's hard to determine if our weight is really impacting our health. I think, that is very emphasized in diet culture, is that, our weight is associated with our health. I remember at the beginning, you had mentioned like that idea people have of, if I'm in a larger body, it's unhealthy. And there's not enough evidence out there to support the claim of weight impacting health directly, right?
Yes.
So if we think about those yo-yo diets, the long history of weight cycling that our culture has had, then we have to look at, well, what factors in with the weight cycling? Inflammation, chronic stress levels, and that can play a huge role, in our health, right?
Yes, that's a very good point, Olivia, that you brought up, and I do believe, in agreement with what you just said, that it can have different effects on the body, right? With the weight cycling and different types of health concerns, right, that result from the weight stigma. And definitely when we talk about weight stigma and like stress, imagine you going to the doctor and the doctor is telling you that because of your BMI or because of your size that you need to lose weight, right? And that you're not healthy. And just hearing those words of like, I'm overweight, I'm obese, that can really create a lot of shame and can create a lot of guilt, right? And that can lead to like, that stress, right? And anxiety and worry. And that can also directly impact health too. And so when I think about what you said, it's not necessarily that the food is playing a role in like health concerns, and it's not necessarily that food is bad for you or unhealthy, right? It's more so the stress that people are experiencing as a result of being rejected by society based on their weight. I really like that you mentioned that, because that really gives like our listeners more insight into like what is actually happening. What does this look like?
I like how you mentioned like the food is not, to blame, because I think like we see that, right? We see food getting a bad rep. We see like this healthy versus unhealthy mentality, and like even morality being associated with food. Like you might hear like a relative say, "Oh, I'm so bad, I ate a cookie," right? And like as a therapist, I'm sure you have a lot to say about that, of how it impacts our mental health. So I'll turn it over to you on that one.
Yes, definitely. And I think that when we talk about mental health and like food, right, I think that definitely sometimes we find ourselves like at holiday parties or like at social gatherings with family or friends, right? Especially around the holidays, maybe they're mentioning like, you should stay away from this food and it's unhealthy, or I'm going to not eat anything until dinner time on Thanksgiving Day, right? And it's just like this pattern of like dieting, restriction that, is not good for the body and is very harmful, tied with, the comments that we hear from our family members and friends, about how we need to lose weight, right? Or how this food is unhealthy. That can create a lot of guilt when we do eat food, right? When we do eat foods that feel like, they're unhealthy, it creates a lot of guilt, creates a lot of like feelings of, shame, you know what I mean? And that in itself, can make people feel like, very like anxious, depressed, stressed, worried. And on top of that, going back to, mental health generally, it makes it hard for people to like, set boundaries sometimes. It makes it hard for people to feel like they can speak up and say something, right? It makes it hard for people to feel like they can respond to their family and friends and, let them know like, hey, that's not okay to label this food as unhealthy, or that's not okay to call me fat, or that's not okay to go hours without eating and just eat things at the end of the day for Thanksgiving, right? So I think it creates a lot of like challenges where people feel like they can speak up because of the response that they may get from other people, right?
Right. And adding to that, like it creates a lot of mistrust, a lot of mistrust in like our own body. And as like, we're all born as intuitive eaters when we're babies.
Yes.
That concept of intuitive eating, relying on our body to tell us like when we're hungry, when we're full, what we're craving. Yes. Our body gives us so many internal signals. And we unfortunately, like as we age and we have society's views and beliefs about food in our ear, a lot of people gravitate away from intuitive eating, and that's when disordered eating can happen, right? Of like viewing foods as healthy and unhealthy and not honoring what our body wants. And like you had mentioned, maybe like family members or friends like giving you feedback on what you should be eating, how you should be nourishing your body. And that feedback often is never helpful, right? It creates body distrust. We feel like we can't, trust ourselves to make these decisions, and then it, plays a role in our self-esteem and impacting our mental well-being as well.
That's a very good point. And self-esteem is very good point. Very much tied into this too, right? I think that when you are in a space where you feel like, because of my size or how I look, or because of like what I'm eating, or because of, what this person is saying to me, I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel like I'm worthwhile, or I don't feel like I'm valuable. It can be really challenging to go through those emotions and feelings. And I think that, people forget how damaging, weight stigma can be. I'm glad that, we actually had the opportunity to talk about this today, because it creates like, more awareness for people to know that like this is a problem, right? I think that when we go back to, those feelings of like rejection and those feelings of like shame and guilt that may come along with, weight stigma, I think that one of the ways that, could be impactful and positively impactful in like helping individuals like navigate those feelings, first identify like, that there's a problem, that, I don't feel good. It doesn't feel good when people say these things to me, or I don't feel that great in my body right now. We talked about like, we're going to be talking about health at every size, right? And I think, tying into that health at every size is that idea of like body neutrality, right? So, being comfortable in your body when you're comfortable, but also being okay and nourishing your body and taking care of yourself even when you don't feel like you love your body that day. Going back into the idea of like health at every size, right? Health at every size creates a space where we feel like all bodies matter, right? It's more inclusive, and we don't feel like we have to hide ourselves because of our size or because of our weight. It creates a space where you feel like you're seen and you're heard, right? And you're part of the broader society, right? And
inclusive.
Yes, and you have a voice, right? What are some of the things that you think might be helpful for decreasing weight stigma?
Thank you for bringing up health at every size. That is, and also you had brought up the idea of creating awareness towards weight stigma, and that's why we're here today, right?
Yes.
Is to create awareness of how weight stigma does impact people, individuals, and us as society as a whole, right?
Yes.
And a lot of what we've talked about is like how our society is impacted by weight stigma, and we talked about like messages we hear from social media, we hear from loved ones. And like one thing like we want to point out too is that our like loved ones, our family, our friends, they always mean well, right? Like all these messages we're hearing, they're coming from like good intentions. And also I think there is some ignorance in our society of not understanding how weight bias does impact other people's health, right? And even our own health. So, you know, that's why we're here today, is to talk about health at every size. And health at every size, as you mentioned, like is a weight inclusive principle, right? Of being able to treat people of all body sizes, all body shapes, and giving, you know, equal access to healthcare is a big component. And respectful care too, right? Not discriminating against people on their body sizes or their shapes is another big part of health at every size. Another component is life enhancing movement. And that means moving your body how you feel you want to move it, right? It's intuitive. And, you know, moving for well-being, but also like no forced movement, no like, I know movement like in our fitness world kind of has like its own stigma of like, you know, it should hurt if you're doing it right?
Very good point. Very good point. I have heard that a lot of the times. Yes. And even people, you know, engaging in movement where when they feel tired, right? Or when they're in pain, right? You know, that's so, you know, common. We hear of things like that, right? And I think that, you know, movement should be enjoyable, right? Like you mentioned, food should be enjoyable, right? You should be able to enjoy your body, right? You should be able to, you know, do what you want to do, say what you want to say, right? And be comfortable in your own skin. And I think that health at every size really creates that space where you start to feel comfortable in your skin, right? And you in being yourself and your identity. I think in our society, you know, people do, you know, and maybe shame is not the right word, but sometimes some people do create a lot of like, you know, fuss over like people not like engaging in movement, right? But movement is a choice, right? People do have a choice to, you know, engage in movement or not engage in movement, right? But I feel like in our society it's so forced, right? And if someone feels like it's a part of like their health practice, or like it's good for their mental health or their physical health to engage in movement, that's okay, right? And if someone doesn't want to engage in movement, that's okay too, right? I think that really what's behind it is, you know, having a choice, right? And you're saying that, okay, today I want to engage in movement, or today I don't want to engage in movement because I'm tired, right? Or I don't want to engage in movement today because I'm not feeling well, right? Or I don't want to engage in movement because I don't feel like it today, right? So I think that's a part of it too, is like having that choice too. And that's why I think that the health at every size approach, even like body neutrality, going into that approach as well too, can be helpful for individuals, and like giving them a choice and allowing them to see that like, even if, you know, other people don't see me the way I see myself, or even if I don't see myself the way other people see me, you know, I'm still worthwhile, I'm still valuable, right? And even if I have a day where I don't like my body, even if I have a day where, you know, I don't feel that great, I still have to care for it. I still have to feed myself. I still have to do all the great things that, you know, are necessary for my body to function. Yeah.
Right. And like going off of that too, like when we are nourishing our body, one thing that can be important is remembering like nourishing our body, what we eat does not need to be tied to movement, right? Like I don't need to earn my food.
Yes.
Unpopular opinion.
Yes.
Unpopular fact.
Yes.
That I don't have to, you know, earn my food, right? I can enjoy my food and I don't need to compensate for it and go on a walk right after or go on a run.
Yes.
You know, movement really should be enjoyable, and like you said, we should have a choice in it. And,
yes.
what type of movement feels good for our body.
Yes. So, thinking about like some of the things that can be helpful for reducing weight stigma, right? Can you think of any things that you would find like helpful for someone? Let's say, for example, that example we talked about earlier, where someone is at like a Thanksgiving gathering and someone is making comments about like their body, or they're saying that they shouldn't eat a certain food because it's unhealthy. What would you say to them, that person, to help them feel like they have a voice and they can like speak up for themselves in those situations?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And every situation's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every person we interact with is different. But I think like the main key is like stating our own boundaries, how we feel comfortable, right?
Yes.
So one person might feel comfortable addressing it head on and, like stating, please don't comment on my food, or don't comment on my plate. Don't comment on my body, if that comes up at the table. Some other people might feel more comfortable with a more passive approach of leaving the table for a bathroom break.
Yes.
Getting space, using coping skills at the table.
Yes.
Those are all important like strategies. Making sure basically like you have your own armor to feel comfortable and to exist.
Yes. I love what you said about like having your own armor to feel comfortable and to exist. That's so powerful. I think that, it's interesting how you mention it, because it sounds like you can kind of take a gentle approach, right? Towards like, setting that boundary, maybe getting up to go to the bathroom, or maybe you can take a more like direct approach, right? Or more of a rebellious approach, to, just let this person know, like, I don't like what you said, right?
Right.
So I definitely, appreciate what you just said. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. How would you help someone who, let's say they are like having an unhealthy relationship with food? How would you use a health at every size approach to help them, navigate like that unhealthy relationship with food?
If someone, for those that do have an unhealthy relationship with food, I would, look into seeing an eating disorder dietitian and also an eating disorder therapist to help them. Because we know that when people have an unhealthy relationship with food, like if there's disordered eating present or even an eating disorder, it's not always directly about the food. It could also be about the beliefs we're holding behind the food. So a dietitian could be helpful to help them learn how to enjoy foods and to nourish their body in an adequate manner. And a therapist can also help to challenge those beliefs that they're holding behind food and even body image, because we know our society does tie in body image and food.
Yes.
And that correlation there we see with eating disorders is we might see the disordered eating or eating disorder play out with food, but often it's not about the food.
Yes. That's a very good point that you just mentioned, right? The eating disorder is not always about the food. There's so many other aspects to the eating disorder. There's those thoughts, right? There's the body, right? There's so many different, areas to, that are also points of focus, right, with the eating disorder. And although, an individual with an eating disorder is struggling like with food, right? But there's so much underlying that, right? And definitely with eating disorders, it can be a way of coping with, different types of like challenges and issues, right? It could be a way of coping with trauma, right? Could be a way of coping with anxiety. Could be a way of coping with low self-esteem, right? So many different things, right? Could be a way of coping with loss, right? So I like your point that, it's not just about the food. There's something underneath that too. What books would you recommend to individuals to learn more about health at every size, to learn more about weight stigma, eating disorders, or, any of the other things we talked about today?
Yeah, and there's so many resources out there. There's books by dietitians. One good example is Anti-Diet. That is a book that it gives a background of weight, weight bias, and it gives also a good background of the history of weight culture throughout the centuries. So that can be, really eye-opening to see that. And it also talks about dieting and why obsessing over what you eat is bad for your health. There's also other books too. There's Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. And this one talks about the racial origins of fat phobia in history. That's a good book. And there's another one, The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. That's another good one, and talks about like taking up space, and it's okay to take up space.
Yes. I like those book recommendations. And I like what you said lastly, is that it's okay to take up space. I think that a lot of the times with individuals who have been experiencing weight-based discrimination or an eating disorder or mental health issue, right? Or any, related challenges, right? I think that a lot of the times they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they feel like, they cannot take up space, right? And they feel like they don't have a voice, right? And they have to suffer in silence, right? And so I like what you said, that it's okay to take up space. It's okay to be you and who you are, right? It's okay to, have a moment where you are struggling, and be able to, reach out for support for it, right? That's okay, right? It's okay to be you. It's okay to, take up that space.
Yeah, I really like how you reiterated, the importance of being able to take up space.
Yes. Thank you so much, Olivia, for joining me today. I really appreciate your, insight, and I really appreciate your knowledge and expertise and your time. I would love to have you on again. So this is not the last time.
Thank you for having me, Olu. It's a pleasure. I feel honored that you asked me to come here today. And once we know better, we can do better as a society. And, every day we're always learning. New research is always coming out. We're always learning more. And, to our listeners, just please have an open mind. And, we might have challenged some of the biases out there today. And with that, I would just add that, having an open mind can be really helpful to be aware of our own biases that we might be holding.
Yes. Thank you for being on our show.
Thank you.